The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back with another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution Radio, Freedom Slips, in Studio B. I was 1 second late there because I didn't turn my cell phone off. I am your host, Diamond, and this is my lovely co-host, Leah Shaper. We are the dynamic duo that make up Oppenheimer Ranch Project.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be continuing the discussion about volcanoes because volcanoes are in the news. Everyone is interested about volcanic eruptions. We just had a VEI-4 in Kamchatka with Shivalush still erupting 6 times over a period of 5 days, sending ash all the way into British Columbia yesterday. There were ash warnings, so no fly zone, aviation color code red. And we also have up in Alaska in the Aleutians, Anokchak, it's right in between a large erupting volcano and a supervolcano. It erupts when it erupts big at VEI-6, and there is magma being emplaced, massive amounts of uplift at Aniakchak.
That's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, Aniakchak. We'll get to that. And people are worried because it appears as if Aniakchak is going to erupt. So what we have in the Northern Hemisphere now is a VEI-4, Shivalush, puffing and passing. That went to 52,000 feet, the official number, which puts some of that material into the stratosphere. And if Aniakchak blows at 6, VEI-6, that's definitely in the stratosphere.
Yeah, and then you've got 2 going off at once. I imagine both of those would stay in the Northern Hemisphere, any of that material in the stratosphere?
Yeah, they're not really big enough, I think, to affect the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
But today's show is going to be on volcanism in New Mexico because I want to talk about the Valles Caldera, which is one of the volcanic complexes in New Mexico. New Mexico is literally a geologist's dream if they want to teach about volcanoes. In New Mexico, it contains every type of volcano on Earth. That's pretty amazing. That's one cool state. Yeah, so we'll get to that later in the show when we talk about more recent lava flows in New Mexico. Leah and I even visited the Carrizozo region, not the Carrizozo flow specifically. We were in the northern part. We drove across. Remember, we walked around. It almost looked like it just erupted like last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still fresh and sharp and dangerous. But that was erupting just a few thousand years ago, and we will get to that later in the show. But let's share the screen here and get started with, let me know if you can see something.
I see it.
That is Aniakchak. Aniakchak. And this is a caldera that is now filling with magma. The uplift is in the center, to the left of that cinder cone. And there is enough magma being emplaced in uplift for around a VEI-4 eruption. The last time this erupted was in 1931 in a big way, and I think it formed that cinder cone there.
Okay.
There have been other eruptions since then. I did a whole show last night on it. But, and this used to be a big lake until 3 or 4 eruptions blew and evaporated a lot of the water out. And now there's just a small lake up here in the northern part. Can you see it? It's weird because it's black and white.
Yeah, I can't really see that.
So up here is still a 260-acre lake left, which is basically a puddle because it's only 60 feet deep. So that's Aniakchak. And the caldera eruption here, let's go look at that. That happened 3,645 years ago. And it wasn't this isn't the opening where the lava came out. Right in the middle here was a volcano, a cinder cone that looked like St. Helens, let's say, but the magma chamber was 10 times wider than the volcano. So when it erupted at VEI-6 and blew up, this is how much lava was underground in the chamber, that when it was evacuated, all of this land, I think it's 16 miles wide, collapsed down into the hole.
Wow. It's such a well-defined caldera too.
Yeah, this is a really good example of a caldera and how they form. which it leads us to what we're going to talk about in a minute, the Valles caldera here, which is the same size about. I think this is about 12 or 16 miles across, and we'll get to the diameter. But you can see the circular depression that has dropped down, and then you can see subsequent little cinder cone volcanoes inside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So same thing is happening there is happening here. Now, what's interesting about the Valles caldera is last week, you and I talked about Toba. You know, that's the biggest eruption in the last 28 million years, or is it 32? What was it?
I don't ask me. I can never
It's
remember
about
numbers like
that because the one before this is La Garita, and we also talked about that. And they're both VEI8. So those are the only two VEI8 eruptions in, let's say, the last 30 million years. Toba, 74,000 years ago, and then La Garita about 30 million years ago.
Yeah.
Now, there have been lots of VEI7s in between.
Sure.
But not only was Toba erupting 74,000 years ago when they said that it didn't affect the climate. Remember?
Yeah.
That's so but also the Toba extinction theory, or the Toba bottleneck theory, states that because of this eruption, humanity came surprisingly close to extinction.
It's kind of funny because sometimes you find both of those narratives in the same place, that it didn't affect the climate, but it created this genetic bottleneck.
Yeah.
Don't both of those things likely need to be true at the same time?
Yeah, I think mutually exclusive comes up there, doesn't it? It's like one can't be the other, can't be the other. So how did everyone die? It just got dark and they all died?
Right.
They died from darkness.
It's magic.
But clearly this was such a geophysical event that it shook planet Earth. This volcano is, where the heck is Toba? Sumatra, isn't it?
Yeah, Sumatra.
And but it covered the entire continent of India, which is, 1,000 miles away or more, with 6 inches of ash.
Yeah.
So big eruption, definitely darkened the skies for long periods of time, which would have affected plant life and the climate.
Yes.
Yeah. But so Toba wasn't the only thing affecting the climate. Guess what else was erupting at the same time? The Valles Caldera in New Mexico. So for those of you that don't know where the Valles Caldera is, it's up in the north central region, above Albuquerque, or right in the Albuquerque region. It's not that far from us, just a few hours. And the Valles Caldera is, in fact, 13.7 miles wide. And let's take a look at that right there. So that's the scale, 13.7 miles wide. And guess what's associated with the Valles Caldera? Same here in Pagosa. We're near the La Garita. We have hot springs. There are hot springs down there in fumaroles, very famous ones. The Jemez Mountains are there.
The springs in Jemez Mountains are awesome. I was there I don't know, more than 25 years ago. Awesome spot.
And the high point in the region is Redondo Peak at 11,253 feet. Let's talk a little bit about the geology. So it does have a circular rim, similar to Aniakchak. That's so hard to say.
Yeah.
And we did tell you the rim measures 13.7 miles in diameter. Now, this caldera surrounding volcanic structures are one of the most thoroughly studied caldera complexes in the United States. Research studies have concerned the fundamental processes of magmatism, hydrothermal systems, ore deposition, and nearly 40 deep cores have been examined, resulting in extensive subsurface data. So very highly studied area. And here, let's go look. Do you see where it's located in the state there?
Yeah, it's a little hard to see, but for me anyway.
But what happened?
But yes, generally I see it.
New Mexico is cut in half here, and the Valles Caldera is on that cut in half line here by the Rio Grande. So this is the Rio Grande River. and it cuts the state in half, and it flows all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. So if this is the Rio Grande River and this is the state, this portion of the state is clearly the lowest, or else the river wouldn't be flowing there.
Right.
So if you think of New Mexico as a whole, in the middle there where the river is, the Rio Grande, it's actually bent down.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. The same thing is happening in East Africa. This region is the Rio Grande Rift. So just like East Africa, and this is in the center of the plate. This is very interesting. And this leads more evidence to expanding Earth, because take a look at the Rio Grande Rift on this map. It ends in Colorado. So and the blue is the Rio Grande River. That blue line is the Rio Grande River. Mm-hmm. And it's emanating up here in Alamusa. You know where it starts. Like when we drive over into Del Norte, that's like the beginning of it.
Yeah.
So this rift zone ends up there in Leadville, in north central Colorado, and it gets wider to the south. Do you remember the picture in the expanding Earth, that like butterfly flower?
No, I don't remember that actually.
Well, the rifts widen towards the equator, which is exactly what this rift is doing.
Oh, do you mean like the orange peel effect?
Yeah, the orange peel effect.
Yeah.
Here is another one of those openings.
Yeah.
And it's still opening, and it's wider to the south towards the equator, and it ends up, it terminates up in the north.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so when you get a rift, so in the center of our plate, in the North American plate, there is something pulling it apart in two directions. Mm-hmm. So this side is getting pulled west, and the other side is getting pulled east. And then what you get there is a drop down, a graben, a fault basin. So do you see here the two arrows? That's the two pieces pulling apart, and the center falls down.
Yeah.
It also forms cracks all the way down into the mantle, which is how you can get these big supervolcanic events.
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously something has to fill in that space, right? So magma filling in that space makes the most sense.
Well, more importantly, as it's pulling apart, it allows for planes of weakness that extend for miles into the mantle. And when you do that, it's like depressurizing a Coke bottle. When you take the top off, same thing happens here. You can get volatile gases that escape, and then it changes whatever is down there under pressure into liquid, and it comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So usually the rocks at that depth are stable if they're contained, but if you allow an opening, bad things can occur if the right volatiles are there.
Do you think that rifts like this can actually cause cracks in plates over time?
There absolutely is a crack in the plate. Yes. Yeah. There are multiple cracks here.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like a mini version of what we would be looking at in expanding Earth when plates are separating. You know, this would be the beginnings of that process.
Yeah.
Because the plates they weren't unto themselves from the beginning. It was just all one crust. That's the idea anyway. And then eventually they split into separate plates, and this would be the process.
And the rifting in this area and the volcanic events have been going on for tens of millions of years.
Right.
It aligns with the expansion idea that the Earth really only started expanding in a great fashion about 220 million years ago.
Yeah.
With the formation of the Atlantic.
Yep.
And the ever expansion of the Pacific, which is why those oceans are both as big as they've ever been.
Yes.
I wonder why that is.
Yeah.
It's very bizarre. Yeah. So when you have a situation like this with a rift that goes all the way down into almost the outer core, you've got large amounts of magma moving up, the same thing that's happening under Yellowstone. Mm-hmm. And then you get subsequent melts of the subsurface or whatever rocks that this is coming up. It starts melting with the sedimentary rocks or other igneous rocks, and it forms different types of lava. We were talking about this the other night.
Yeah.
And the unique thing is that Valles Caldera has erupted in every type of way. And what I mean by that is it's spewed out almost every type of lava. It's literally like a textbook like a fountain. Let's do some basalt. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
That comes out, and then one day it's like, oh no, we're explosive, like Mount St. Helens. Let's do some rhyolite. Boom, and it blows up. Very bizarre region, but because of the scale of this rift, the depth it goes into the earth, the amount of magma that's come up, it makes sense that you're going to get all these different types of volcanoes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, right? Because you're going way deep into this rift, so that you have the opportunity to involve all different kinds of material that are in the crust.
Now the question is, and we'll get to that in the second half, is this rift active? How come there's no volcanoes going off in New Mexico right now?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really need that happening, but you do need the heat still there. We know it's there because of all the hot springs.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know that just a few thousand years ago, basalt decided to flow out on the surface. We'll get into this in more detail, but this is one of the most obvious things that astronauts can see on Earth from space. This lava flow, which is called the Carrizozo lava flow. Pretty spectacular. And here,
Yeah.
I think this is from a satellite shot, but they zoomed it in to what it would look like if you were at 37 miles up. So if you're in space, 200 miles up or higher, it's going to look a little smaller. But if you're looking at Earth, there's a clear black line in New Mexico that you can pick out, and it's this lava flow.
Yeah.
It's about 3,200 years old. But let's talk a little bit about the entire history of Valles Caldera before we get to the more recent events, because in the second half, we'll talk a little bit more about the recent flows and their effect on the native communities there. Because clearly, if you're living somewhere and then all of a sudden this giant lava starts coming out of the ground, you might not know what's going on, first of all, but
Right.
You certainly would probably, if there's toxic gases and people are just dying that go up to the lava because they're curious, you'd probably leave.
Yeah, probably.
Now, what's cool about Valles Caldera is it spewed out a whole bunch of types of ash and tuff. Like I talked about, it's erupted every kind. And you and I have put our hands on and dug into some of these eruptions.
Mm-hmm.
Sankawi, the totally awesome native site
Mm-hmm.
that's down by Bandolier. And the Bandolier tuff, these are ash deposits that are like hundreds of feet thick that you can carve out with like a stick.
Yeah.
And in fact, the natives made lots of cliff dwellings with these by simply digging into the ash.
Yeah.
There's also the unique channels and all that other stuff at Sankawi that we saw.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. The channels that the historians claim are like walking paths, but if you look at them, if you get there and you look at them, they're clearly channels for water.
Yeah,
and these are perfectly carved. It's very deliberate. Like they'll claim that it's all because of footsteps over the same path over a long period of time. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Now those ash deposits are quite old. So the Valles Caldera is the younger of two calderas known in this location having collapsed and burying. There was an older caldera called the Toledo caldera. So this means that this area evacuates large amounts of lava occasionally in these huge explosions, which is how you get 300 feet of ash or the Bandolier tuff.
Yeah.
And the Bandolier tuff is what Bandolier is dug into and Sankawi is dug into. So the Toledo and Valles calderas were formed during eruptions 1.61 million and 1.25 million years ago, respectively. So first the Toledo formed at 1.61, and then a secondary bigger explosion, 1.25, formed the now Valles caldera, which collapsed on top of the Toledo.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the history on the two big booms. And the caldera forming Toledo eruption, the first one, in place the Atowi member of the Bandolier tuff, which can be seen along the canyon walls of the Valles caldera, and obviously in Bandolier. The younger is called the Tishigre, and it can be seen along the canyon west walls of the Valles caldera, including San Diego Canyon. Now the younger Tshireg, I can't say it. Tshireg. Shirij, member of the Bandelier Tuff. That one, the younger one, was formed during the Valles Caldera eruption 1.23 million years ago. So, based on those numbers, there weren't any people here.
Yes.
Yeah. So no one really saw this, but there were megafauna here that probably were affected in a big way.
Sure.
What else can we talk about here? All right, let's just go look at some pictures. So here's the Valles Caldera. Now, based on what we just went over, this drop down here, this feature in the center, the 13-mile wide caldera formed 1.25 million years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so all these volcanoes, which looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least maybe 7 here.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is 1, 8. Those all formed after that.
Yeah.
And so what usually happens in these calderas, they erupt most of the lava, but there's a little left over. And that may, after the surface of the ground drops down, that then pressurizes the remaining lava. And then you get these little secondary cinder cone eruptions, which is a different type of volcano, right on top of a volcano. Now take a look at this caldera. Look at how flat it is.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see some of the lava domes, they're the hills with trees on them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So this caldera, based on what we know now, this is amazing about geology. This geography we're looking at has been exactly the same for 1.25 million years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how long it takes to weather rocks.
Yeah.
They don't weather very quickly. So people that are concerned, that can't wrap their head around Sacsayhuaman and the megaliths and the amount of weathering you see on there, they could be very old.
Yeah.
Yeah. They could definitely be tens of thousands of years old.
Right. Well,
Because
and
this
in that
stuff-
case,
yeah.
we're in that case, aren't we dealing with much, much harder rock than what would be the tuff that would be here?
Yeah, there are some harder rocks here, but
Right.
the feature itself, the rim of the caldera has little to do with the volcanic eruption. This flat area here is the same as the top. It just fell down 1,000 feet after the lava was evacuated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just making a point about the level of erosion, let's say at Sacsayhuaman, right? Because obviously you have to consider the hardness of the stone when you're considering weathering as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I want to talk about, let's talk about the eruption that matches Toba that's coming out from the Valles Caldera.
Yeah.
And so that happened after the 1.25 million year old drop down. So this is a smaller eruption. And it is referred to as the battleship rock Ignimbrite. Now, Ignimbrites are a type of volcanic rock. That's all it is. And it's like these geologists came up with some of the hardest words to pronounce when they named a lot of stuff. It's like, who would come up with that anyway? And Ignimbrites, it's very hard to say. You try to say it.
Ignimbrite.
Ignimbrite.
Ignimbrite. You got to get that first N in there.
Ignimbrite.
Ignimbrite.
Yeah, so this Ignimbrite was initially thought to be 55,000 years old until better dating techniques came out. And when you date things that are this old, you're using like potassium argon or some other pretty stable isotope that you can nail dates. And then multiple people dated it using these techniques, and they all got very specific to exactly the same time as when Toba was erupting 74,300 years ago or so. Now, the Ignimbrite did not form the caldera, so it's an eruption inside of the caldera here. So let me move so one of these cones, or maybe the big central one, something exploded. There was a neck. There's a source to the lava. That's where the paroxysm occurs. Does that make sense? It doesn't have to be in a specific place. But this Ignimbrite was so huge that it filled the entire caldera with lava. That's 13 miles wide.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a pretty significant eruption. It also emplaced a 300-mile ash fall. So very violent event at the same time of Toba.
Yeah. You know, I very briefly just searched for the Valles Caldera, and one thing that I looked at placed the size of the eruption. I believe it would be the 1.2 million year eruption that formed the caldera that we're seeing now at a level that's lower than Yellowstone.
Oh, so let's talk about the volcanic explosive index when we get back.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you in 2 minutes.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine.
There was blood on the wire.
Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
There have been imaginative science fiction writers for generations.
Be evasive.
But that doesn't mean that they're telling the truth as opposed to fiction.
I'm aware of some archaeologists that have uncovered large bones indicating giants in Virginia. Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, indicating that there were giants before the Nephilim.
And sons of God, plural. They weren't talking about Jesus coming down and
No, that's right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm Steve Crawford. Join me every Thursday night in Studio A at 6 p.m. Eastern for Factor Theory Live. Find us on www.revolution.radio. Great guests and great stories. What do you believe?
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back like crack. It's still playing. The second half of Cosmic Catastrophe, where we left off, and Leo was saying that the giant caldera forming eruption, the 1.25 million year old eruption at Valles Caldera, was smaller than Yellowstone.
Yeah, just based on the little diagram I was looking at, it would sort of suggest that the volume of the eruption would be about 4 times less than Yellowstone.
Yeah, and that's why I started off showing Aniakchak. So here's Aniakchak, same diameter as Valles Caldera, and Aniakchak has only ever erupted to VEI 6. So Yellowstone's a VEI 7 or greater, the big booms.
Yeah.
So this is probably a VEI 6 volcano. The
yeah.
Caldera,
also,
go ahead.
Also, the amount of thermal energy would be about, like Yellowstone would be 71 times more thermal energy than Valles Caldera.
The smallest Yellowstone eruption probably they're using, because there are 3 major eruptions.
Okay, yeah. This is the 600,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's the most recent. That's the smallest of the 3.
Okay.
But still VEI 7. And now people think Yellowstone is big. When we were talking La Garita, that's 3 times bigger than the biggest Yellowstone eruption.
Yeah.
That's massive. So getting back to the Valles Caldera here, in the second half I want to talk, let's get more recent. We were talking how there was an eruption 74,000, same time as Toba. That one that filled the entire caldera with lava, and has that funny name. It's the battleship rock Ignimbrite. That one was only VEI 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this baby doesn't really have the potential to be a super volcano, but it's right on the cusp.
Yeah.
And it's one of thousands of volcanoes. Let's get to a graph here. One of thousands of volcanoes. Oh, did I just erase it?
Uh-oh.
Come on back, baby. Now we'll get to that lava flow. Where is it, please? There it is. So these are all the recent volcanic rocks in New Mexico, and they're obviously not coming from the same volcano, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're all seeping out of this rift area, which is right down where the Rio Grande is. And so this is the Valles Caldera region here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the most recent lava flow in New Mexico is the Zuni Bandera volcanic field right here, where the Zuni Nation is. Look at how massive that is. That's like over 100 square miles of lava.
Yeah.
So New Mexico's have been very active over the last, let's say, million years as far as lava is concerned.
Remind me, when was the La Garita eruption?
28 million, 30 million years ago.
Okay. I'm just sort of thinking about, generally this whole area. Like if you continued to follow this rift north, you could maybe argue that part of the pressure release zone is also La Garita.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in there. Yeah. It's on that line.
Yeah. So this area has been expanding for millions of years.
Yeah.
Many millions.
Yes, indeed. Oh, this is the one I wanted to show you. Take a look at this. So, young supervolcano. Look at that. And that is what they're showing under here. You can't see it.
Okay.
They've covered it with this volcano, but this would be where the blue circle is. So they're considering Valles Caldera a young supervolcano, meaning it has the potential to erupt at VEI 7 or greater.
Yeah.
And here we see these gray circles?
Uh-huh.
Those are old supervolcanoes. So if you think about what's happening at the Hawaiian Islands movement, that the hotspot may have been down here in the south, And because of the expanding Earth, a hotspot is now underneath the Valles Caldera.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Because clearly they're old. They're not coming up as the last 5 million years. These are much older calderas that were VEI 7 or greater.
Yeah. And
That's
so
amazing.
if you think about kind of that orange peel effect idea or whatever, you have this rift, it looks like it's expanding like this, right? And so that it's kind of keeps moving up here to keep opening the rift up this way.
And to prove our point, the yellow or the orange down here in the south, this is all lava flow or volcanic rocks that are older than 5 million. And all the red ones in the north are younger than 5 million. So the hotspot has migrated hundreds of miles in just 5 million years. Yeah. So the Earth is expanding rapidly, or the crust is slipping or moving rapidly through some force.
Yeah.
And then if you look at all the square boxes that show different volcanic sources, there are dozens of potential volcanoes that can erupt in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Some of them are so recent, like Sunset Crater. When you go look at it, it looked like it was just formed 10 years ago.
Yeah.
These are like perfectly shaped cinder cones. This is a great segue into my next chart. And here's a cinder cone right here. And they're not even showing Sunset Crater, but here, take a look at this. This is Cat Hills in Los Lunas. We were in Los Lunas, remember? When we went to see the 10 Commandments?
Yes.
We missed this. This was there.
To the rock.
Yeah, why didn't we go see this?
I don't know.
Gosh. But this interesting chart shows all the volcanoes in New Mexico. There's calderas. Yeah, here's the Valles Caldera. There's domes. This is I can't even read that. It's inside of the Valles Caldera. One of the subsequent recent eruptions is a dome eruption. There's composite volcanoes, cinder cones, obviously, like Cat Hills and Sunset Crater. There are shield volcanoes, like Cerro Verde. And that would be like Mauna Loa, a basaltic shield volcano. So not explosive. And they form this nice, broad, flat mountain kind of thing, which you can see here. And then there's these unique features of these giant lava flows that we talked about, like the Carrizozo. Because it's a rift, a crack can just form and lava can just come out.
Yeah.
It's a very bizarre region.
So that's basically like a fissure of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like what you see sometimes in Iceland, parts of Iceland.
Well, they consider those shield volcanoes.
Okay.
Because over time they will build up a mound, where in this case, a crack just forms, lava pours out, and it stops. There's no like leftover dome or little cinder cone or anything. It's just like the earth cracks and cries lava.
Yeah. it's just filling in the space.
Yeah, and some of these
lava.
some of these are the biggest lava flows or eruptions in the last 50,000, wait a minute, or longer. Let me get some of the stats. Well, before we get to that, let's talk about, so we were in this lava flow here, the Grants, and it was this blocky, it's called Pahoehoe lava. So a lot of the lava fields and flow fronts in Hawaii are Pahoehoe. And it's this like blocky, and it's moving forward. It sounds like glass breaking, clink, 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 clink. And so when you're looking at this, it almost looks like it flowed right over the sagebrush yesterday.
Yeah.
Remember how there was like almost nothing growing on it?
Yeah. There's
like, go ahead.
There's fields of this near Albuquerque too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's part of the right up in here. So it could be this flow right out here.
Yeah.
This is right near Albuquerque.
I'm thinking about near Petroglyph National Monument. There are big flows like that.
Yeah, so it's probably right here.
Yeah.
Just south of Valles Caldera, maybe. But you can go drive through, and this is the one we drove through, I think, right here on the east side. And the one we missed, isn't Los Lunas down here in the south?
I can't remember.
Yeah, it's hours south of Albuquerque. So I think that might be in here. But let's talk. So what else did we look? They have Mar volcanoes.
Mhm.
And these are like similar to calderas, where the earth falls down and in. There's volcanic necks, just like Close Encounter of the Third Kind, where the entire volcano has eroded away and the neck is left. These are obviously going to be some of the older volcanoes. They have to be millions of years old to get to this weathering state.
Right.
So this isn't going to be a new volcano. Clearly, this one up here, the cinder cone, is going to be the new volcano. And then they have fields of small cones. This is a very unique feature. Almost looks alien when you're going out in these places in New Mexico and you see all these weird little cinder cones. Just like what was happening back then?
Yeah. Do you think that, like a Mara volcano, do you think that that kind of structure would be sort of similar to what forms when you have like a hot spring, say, right? Like there's like a little portion of the earth, for a hot spring anyway, that kind of collapses in and creates this pressure release hole?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact definition of Mars, so we could just Google it. But what I'm visualizing is lakes here, say.
Yeah.
So there's some association with the groundwater because there's hot springs, there's bubbling mud, like mud pits. And then here, I just put Mar in, and there's a lake in there. So it's similar to a caldera, but a Mar is a broad, low-relief volcanic crater caused by phreomagmatic eruption. So there has to be large interaction with groundwater.
Yeah, okay.
So that's the only difference.
Okay.
And then an explosion occurs when the groundwater comes in contact with a hot lava or magma. So, interesting. So it's just a type of it's a wet volcano.
Yeah.
Let's get to the Carrizozo flow. Take a look at this. So the Carrizozo flow is one of the most studied lava flows on Earth. Let's get some stats. Do they have any stats here? It covers 330 square miles.
Wow.
It's thought to have multiple sources underneath the northern portion here. See Little Black Peak? That could be one of the effusion points. And the evidence suggests that it filled up here it erupted for a period they've determined using paleomagnetism of over 25 years continuously.
Wow.
So it took a while to get all this lava out. And it in fact ranks as the 8th largest volcanic eruption, I think, in the last 100,000 years.
Wow.
And this is bigger than some of the super volcanoes, but it didn't explode. It was just because the VEI index is on the volume of extrusion. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
So the 8th largest volcanic eruption in the last 100,000 years or so, no one even heard it.
Yeah.
It was just quietly filling this valley
oozing
for 25 years.
Crying lava, as you said earlier.
Yeah, and so it goes high on the VEI index, but it wasn't explosive. With a total of 4.3 cubic kilometers of lava.
Wow.
Yeah. And it is thought that this region of the rift erupts in this spectacular fashion every 50,000 years. Which is good news. Do you know why? Because the Carrizozo eruption was just 5,250 years ago. So we got a long time to wait for more lava flows.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in that this is the Smithsonian where they catalog all the eruptions. It's the most comprehensive.
Yeah.
It says confirmed eruption. It does not put a VEI index.
Interesting.
Because it would be disingenuous to say it was VEI 7. It was based on the volume, but there wasn't even a boom.
There really seems like maybe there is and I'm missing it, but it seems like there should be a different scale for, let's say, the explosivity versus the amount of material that's ejected.
Yeah, and then that gets into semantics and subjectivity. You know, every volcanic eruption is unique, and they want to put it all under a moniker. Well, that's a this, and that's a that. But what we learned from just this discussion in under an hour is that a single volcanic source can give you every type of volcano available.
Mm-hmm.
And it could shift on a dime. You get a super volcanic boom, and then for thousands of years, you get cinder cones in the caldera
Mm-hmm.
with different types of lava. Now, one of the most interesting things about Carrizozo and the New Mexico region is that they have obsidian flows.
Yeah.
The pure volcanic glass flows. So this basaltic lava is so pure and cryptocrystalline, meaning there's no phenocrysts or big crystals. It's microcrystalline, that it's glass-like.
Yeah.
And so when these lavas flow, the obsidian is like a shell on the surface, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
It can be 4 or 6 inches thick. I've seen some obsidian cores like the size of small watermelons.
Yeah.
So some of this obsidian can get a foot thick. And if you can get a piece like that and move it to the north into Colorado or anywhere in the Southwest, imagine what you can barter for a flake of that.
Right.
I mean, this is a prized commodity thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And New Mexico had lots of it.
Lots of it. And you still see it everywhere walking around in the desert.
Yeah, literally, if you go 250 miles circumference from these lava flows, you're going to find black obsidian.
Mm-hmm.
And it all came from this source.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so pervasive. Like, we've been in regions of like Los Alamos and where there are thousands of pieces everywhere.
Just everywhere. I mean, you can't walk 3 steps without coming across more.
So that alone, you know, you begin to question what was really going on thousands of years ago with the natives and how they lived and the structures that existed. Mm-hmm. That some of the best material that you need, the building blocks for tools, they knew where to source them and they spread them out everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And then, you know, sometimes you'll find obsidian even up here in the mountains of southwest Colorado. So is that a result of other volcanic explosions, or was that brought here?
Yeah, that's a good question. They can do isotopic analysis, and they have. I didn't bring up any papers, and,
Mm-hmm.
and they prove that like materials have moved thousands of miles.
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah, there's like shells from Central America in Michigan and some of the mounds,
mm-hmm.
and all the giants are missing.
Yeah.
All right, so when is the next time? Here's some more flows. This is an aerial photograph. Here's Zuni Canyon. Here's the Grants, this black area at the top. This is the area
Mm-hmm.
we drove through. There's the highway.
Mm-hmm.
When you're driving through the highway, remember the lava was just on both sides of the road?
Yeah.
Yeah. But to the south, and what we missed, look at the size of this flow.
It's huge.
These are the most recent flows. These are the Zuni flows. These are 2,000 years old.
Wow.
And so there was definitely huge populations of Native Americans in this region while this was erupting. And guess what? They probably saw it cool. Someone took some of the obsidian and was like, we are in business.
Right.
Yeah. Or there was already obsidian from the Carrizozo flows or some earlier basaltic flows in the region.
Sure.
But this simply just gave them more raw material and probably more power overall. These, you know, the tribes in this region could simply fill up satchels of this obsidian and start to move around, and they could get anything they wanted probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Food,
I mean, you have just
tools.
have an endless source of cutting tools and blades. Because it's all about that microcrystalline structure, right? That allows something like obsidian to be extremely sharp.
Yeah. And that leads me back to this and thinking like, yeah, we do need a new type of eruptive scale.
Yeah.
For lava flows.
Yeah. Well, even if you had 2 scales, right? You had the VEI scale, and then you had a scale for explosivity. You could at least use those 2 scales to kind of compare and contrast volcanoes. You could see right away, this one is explosive, this one's not. Like those 2 figures together would be very useful.
All right, I'm trying to find my talking points here.
I mean, all of this together, you know, when we talk about all of the different kinds of volcanoes and how often they're going off, it just brings home the idea that Earth is very much alive and constantly changing, right? Again, I've said this again and again, with the idea that things are static and that there's some sense of normalcy on Earth is really not the case at all. It's like a living, breathing organism.
Yeah, so I can't find the data, but the likelihood of they've done the calculations of an eruption happening in New Mexico are about 1% in the next 100 years and 10% in the next 1,000.
That seems actually fairly significant.
It is, because how do we even know that they know what they're talking about?
Well, there's that.
Now, the one thing we need to worry about, and let's close it up on this, because we were talking about supervolcanoes. There is a list of all the supervolcanoes on Earth, and they have associated melt potentials. And this means how much is the magma chamber underneath of them melted? And then this gives you an idea, is the volcano capable of a super eruption? Mm-hmm. Because according to the volcanologists, a supervolcano has to have a melt ratio of at least 65% in order to blow.
Okay.
So Yellowstone is the least likely supervolcano on Earth right now, likely to blow. It has 5%, maybe up to 15% melt. It's on the lowest level. The volcano with the highest percentage melt, over 65%, is Campi Flegrei, and it has its estimated 85% melt.
Wow.
That's bad news.
Wow, this is Italy, right?
Yeah, and here you can even see a 2016 paper says the clock may be ticking for Italy's Campi Flegrei. Yeah, and so there's a paper that came out in 2016. Temporal models for the episodic volcanism at this supervolcano, Campi Flegrei. And this is bad. Now, this is a VEI 8, and let's get to the stats are astounding. The scientists created a long-term temporal probability model based on available eruptive records to study the clustering pattern at Campi Flegrei, under the assumption that the Monte Nuovo eruption represents the beginning of a new eruptive epoch. Model results on average estimated that the next eruption in the caldera is likely to occur within 100 to 120 years.
Yikes.
Which means any time now.
Don't live in Europe.
And subsequent papers that have come out since this paper state that there is not necessarily precursors to a supervolcano erupting.
Right.
Like a VEI 5, an andesitic volcano like Mount St. Helens, takes weeks to prepare. There's uplift, the altimeters swell. The same thing we're seeing up at Aniakchak. We can see it going up 3 centimeters a day. Like, we know it's going to blow. Increased earthquakes, and then then there's a swarm, and then boom. At these supervolcanoes, a switch turns on and it erupts.
Yeah. And then what is the switch, right? Like, does it have something to do with the solar cycle? Like, if it does, then it's potentially predictable when it's going to go. But
yeah,
no one's going to listen to that. And when this goes off, it'll be a complete disaster for Europe.
Yeah, the model indicates that the eruption could occur as early as 4 to 5 years from now. And this paper is in 2016. So that means we're now
already overdue.
2 years after the potential. So the potential begins now for Campi Flegrei.
And the VEI guessed estimate would be what?
I mean, it has to be 7 or 8.
7. Yeah.
7 or greater. And it says within the next 500 years, it puts it in the 95th percentile. So it's going to erupt in the next 500 years.
Yeah. That's one lifetime.
It has the potential to erupt anytime starting in 2021.
Well, I think you can expect in a lifetime to essentially say goodbye to Europe then.
Yeah. So we just talked about some calderas. This one is 12 kilometers wide, which isn't as big as the other ones. But the width of the caldera does not determine the VEI index.
No.
but a 12-kilometer wide caldera is still quite large.
It gives you an idea of the potential.
Yeah. So this would be the end of the empire for the world. If it did erupt, it would be dark. It would be another dark age like we've talked about. There would be famine, there would be pestilence, there would be plague, there would be starvation. They would burn the witches.
This would be the big one.
That was a great show, guys. Remember to support Revolution Radio. It is the #1 listener-supported radio on the internet. Watch the replay at Magnetic Reversal News and check out our other YouTube, Oppenheimer Ranch Project.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.